Welcome to New York Bio's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Jana Oberman, founder and regulatory affairs strategic consultant at the Oberman Group, and Dr. Amel Ibrahim, CEO and founder of Bio Workshop.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. We are very excited that you're joining us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. A special thank you to TriNet for sponsoring this month's series of breakfast. We are very excited today. We get to take a little bit of a deeper dive into sort of the startup ecosystem and mentoring and how that works, but we get to do it overlaid with a lot of experience and in early stage drug development and regulatory process. So with that, we are excited to have Jana and Amel here today. I will kick it over. Oh, I almost always forget this. I literally should just put a Post-it note on my computer. If you have questions during our conversation with Jana and Amel, I know that you probably will. Please put those in the chat or the Q&A, and Derek and I will get to that in the course of our conversation. So with that, I'll kick it over to Derek to start us off. Thanks.
All right, Jana and Amel, great to have both of you here. I think this is a great topic for today because we talk quite a bit about starting companies. We talk quite a bit about really the early journey to get there. And one of the things that we don't tend to talk about is kind of who helps you, who's there to help, who's there to kind of help steer you through things. And I think that mentorship relationship is really important. So you've both done a ton of interesting things in your own right. So we are going to weave this all together today. So as we start, why don't we actually kick off with a bit of background on both of you. So Jana, why don't you go first?
Yeah,
a little bit about you, tell you how you got where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will not go back to the dawn of time of when I started in industry because we'll be here for a few hours, but I will cut to about 2009. I started working at Hoffman LaRoche in Nutley, New Jersey in regulatory affairs. And I can give just a quick 2-second on what regulatory affairs is because a lot of people don't necessarily know. So what I do is I essentially serve as a guide to biopharma companies as they navigate, or drug development teams as they navigate the complexities of developing a drug, which we know can take somewhere between 7 to 10 years. And so throughout the life cycle of that drug's journey, I serve as sort of the direct interface for the sponsor, the company, and the health authorities, so such as FDA or EMA, the European Medicines Agency. And what I do is I stay abreast of current regulations and the evolving regulatory environment, and I help the company or the teams that I'm working with to interpret these and to apply them to their programs appropriately. So I essentially sort of say that I grew up at Hoffman LaRoche. In 2014, the company shut down its Nutley location, and it had been there for something like 80 years.
Yeah.
It made quite a splash, and moved to Manhattan. And so it moved to the top 2 floors of the Alexandria Center, one of the buildings of the Alexandria Center. And there were only about 230 of us who were retained from the Nutley site. I probably was one of a handful that was super excited about this move because I'm a born and bred New Yorker, and I was really thrilled by the idea of being able to move back home to Long Island, where I grew up and where I am now. And so essentially, when we moved to the site, there was really a focus on trying to make sure that the small ecosystem that existed at the time, and again, this is 2014, knew that we were there, because there wasn't really a widespread network through which to kind of announce our presence. So we were all kind of tasked with taking it upon ourselves to network, find opportunities to do so. And so I started by getting involved with the Women in Bio Metro New York chapter on their steering committee, helped to plan some events, networked in my own right, and through that, I became aware of a subcommittee called Young Women in Bio, again, part of the Metro New York chapter that had just formed at the time. And I also come from a family of New York City Department of Education administrators. So the Young Women in Bio subcommittee was of particular, interest to me because its goal was to expose middle school through high school New York City, students, young ladies to opportunities in STEM careers that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. And so I joined that as the initially as the vice chair and then as the co-chair later on. And we held the inaugural event of Young Women in Bio Metro New York at the Roche Innovation Center.
Yeah.
And we did sort of a day in the life of a drug developer. And it was great. It was honestly super rewarding. And so I felt like I was giving back, but also, again, central to this mission of making sure that folks were aware, in the burgeoning New York City life sciences ecosystem that Roche was there. Fast forward, ultimately, the site was not successful, unfortunately. The site closed down. It no longer exists in New York. I moved on to Ovid Therapeutics, which is a Manhattan-based biotech startup, and was there for about 2.5 years, functioning as the vice president of regulatory affairs, building out a team there. The pandemic hit, and ultimately I moved on to a company called EQRX, which I think you may be familiar with, but I essentially onboarded remotely during the pandemic to a company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So during the pandemic, really, none of us were going anywhere, and much less, going from Long Island to Manhattan. So I kind of lost touch with this network that I had built up. Subsequently had decided to, look for new opportunities in about April of last year, and ultimately started my own consultancy. And we can, later on, we can talk a little bit more about that. But really, when I did that, wanted to reconnect with, and in my spare time, reconnect with the volunteer work that I had been doing previously. Now more a little bit with an eye towards potentially tapping into the Long Island network. And so I'll stop there, but, we can delve a little bit deeper into the Long Island Bio Mentor Initiative, and that's essentially how Amel and I met each other.
Okay, I think that's good. So Amel, why don't we kick it over to you? Tell us how you got here.
Okay, I'm the CEO and founder of BioWorkshop, and this is a New York City-based startup, and we're developing a platform that combines in silico and in vitro tools to make drug discovery and development faster and more accurate. And my journey kind of started, I guess I won't go from the super beginning, but in 2009, I'd graduated from Imperial College London, and there I'd studied for a Bachelor in Science in Immunobiology and Pathology, and also my medical degree. The magical thing about Imperial College was that there was a huge emphasis on research, and particularly translational research and innovation. It's like MIT, a purely technical science and engineering college. And so there was an opportunity to kind of study medicine, but also think of research and innovation that tapped on other areas of science and engineering. And so, you had the development of robotic surgery there. Whilst I was studying there, TNF alpha was kind of discovered at the Kennedy School of Medicine, and that was quite an exciting thing. But the thing that really caught and captured my attention was the innovation that was happening in stem cell research and stem cell biology at the time. And so whilst I was kind of figuring out my research interests, things like iPS cells were developed developed. I presented that paper for Journal Club at that time, and the idea that there was quite a lot in terms of, in the UK, acceptance of what do we do with embryonic stem cell research and biology and that work. So it was very, very interesting to me, and I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with that, but obviously my focus was, studying medicine, becoming a doctor, and I just figuring out how does that all fit, because there wasn't really a framework back then that there is right now. And so when I graduated, I started my medical training in London, and a little bit of burns and reconstructive surgery in Wales. And there I really kind of tried very hard to kind of integrate stem cell research and tissue modeling and that sort of thing into my work. I ended up doing a PhD in Professor Patrizia Ferretti's lab, who, again, we're talking about mentorship, was an incredible mentor with a background in disease modeling and translational research. And I did that alongside my surgical training. And the two helped inform each other. So the focus of my PhD in regenerative medicine ended up kind of taking shape of me using computational biology to model facial diseases in children with rare craniofacial conditions where they get deformities that are very hard to treat. And I was combining that with lab-based research into tissue engineering, bone and cartilage that can be used to then fill in these defects. So the idea was that the computer side would model what was needed to reconstruct these children's faces, and then you would eventually go to the lab and develop the implant, the lifelong kind of autologous implant that would go in there. And so again, that kind of became my first intro into computational biology, and sort of that combining in silico and in vitro science and not seeing them as two separate silos. And whilst I was doing that, I was kind of, after I finished it, awarded the Fulbright Scholarship in 2018 in combination with the Royal College of Surgeons of England. And the idea was to build on the work that I was doing. And so I came along to the US from London and New York. And I was at NYU, where I built on that work and I developed a stem cell biology and tissue modeling research program. And it was, during this time, the experience of kind of being here, the experience of the Fulbright program, you meet a lot of people across the most diverse disciplines, and you learn so much from them. And it just kind of reinforces the idea that it's just about these networks, and as diverse as they can be, you can kind of just transcend national boundaries and the kind of little niches that we live in and do something bigger, greater than the sum. The sum is greater than the individual parts together. And so I, at some point, it became clear to me that I really did want to launch a startup. I had a mission and an interest in research that I felt was really translational, that kind of called on the skills that I had, and just being in New York and the ecosystem here, and I'd say the US as well, where biotech is a lot more mature than even somewhere like the UK, which is, does very well, I would say. But it's just meeting people doing startups, going in to visit incubators, going to conferences and stuff like that. It really made it much more tangible. And so I bit the bullet and I thought, okay, in 2019, at the end of 2019, I sort of said, okay, I'm launching my startup. I left NYU. And then the pandemic happened and I was on a quick timing is everything. I kind of was in the UK for what was supposed to be a quick 2 to 3 week trip.
Oh gosh.
Everything closed, the world closed down. And so I ended up in the UK for 7 months until I got an exemption from the US government to come back to work on BioWorkshop because travel was still restricted. But in that time I worked on, it gave me the time to just look at what my startup was going to be in this new landscape. And it really, with the pandemic, brought home how vulnerable we are and the importance of quickly being able to discover treatments and innovations to kind of cope with these major pandemics and problems. And so that gave me that time, and I worked on some of the stuff that I couldn't work on, the in silico stuff and the computer science stuff, and then came back to the US. And I've been, sort of, I think everyone here will know that like entrepreneurship is amazing in so many ways, but in a way you are often working alone, especially at the early stage, and you don't really know very many people, especially if you are not from the place you are, and especially in a big city like Manhattan where everything's kind of spread apart. And opportunity kind of knocked on my door. I got a LinkedIn message from Anton Xavier of Silicon Valley Bank, who was like, hey, let's have a chat. And then he was like, you know what, the Long Island BioMentor Initiative would be great. I get involved with them. I will introduce you to Diane Fable, who's a director there and of operations. And we did that. They were amazing. The program itself is it's very customizable. They kind of work with you and your startup and see what your needs are at that stage and kind of help you with the connections, the tools, the just support that you wouldn't necessarily have at that stage. And so they connected me with a great mentor team, and obviously people like Jana, who are amazing and give up their time and experience that you just couldn't get elsewhere. They will help with things like legal stuff. They will, business, market research, all the things that, especially at an early stage, you're not necessarily thinking about. And so, with all of that, I've been able to kind of build out BioWorkshop, and we're now at a stage where we have a platform, we have our first clinical asset through that platform, and we are, looking to raise our seed round and build out our technology.
That's fantastic. So just as a very in 30 seconds, what does BioWorkshop do? What is the 30-second pitch on the company?
So we're fixing drug discovery and development by using in silico computer modeling tools so that we can make discovering leads and assets faster and more accurate. And we're combining that with very human relevant tissues that kind of give better in vitro research results than what is currently available, that is more likely to align with what the clinical expectations are.
So basically translating human to human as opposed to animal model to human. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So Jana, how did you come into the? So okay. So now tell the story from the other side. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the mentor network. What are the things that you do kind of before you find your Amel, right? Like where do you how do you find the place that you fit, and what are some of the things that without kind of before you step in, what are some of the things that you wanted to bring to whoever your mentees were going to be?
Yeah, so actually, it was just a happy accident that I found out about the Long Island BioMentor Initiative. And maybe, Derek, we could just take 2 seconds to talk a little bit about the program. I know that
Absolutely.
touched on it, but I would be remiss if I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a shout out. So what the initiative does is it brings together a team of volunteer mentors with early stage entrepreneurs like Amel, and we provide obviously guidance and support, but we all come from different disciplines, so you're kind of getting that crosstalk there for the mentee, and so we support them as they execute their business plan. The initiative itself was based on a model that came out of MIT called the Venture Mentor Service. And it's led by a partnership between the Center for Biotechnology and Accelerate Long Island in collaboration with Stony Brook University, Brookhaven National Laboratory, Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, Hofstra, and the Feinstein Institute at Northwell. Mm-hmm. So living here on Long Island, I've, again, taken my my sort of passion for wanting to see the ecosystem thrive and grow, and it has grown, in many, many ways in New York City, but I think it's still in its infancy on Long Island. Starting to see some more movement there, but since I've been working, out of my house for the past few years, and not in Manhattan as much as I would like anymore, I started to sort of look for opportunities, as I said earlier, to get engaged in the Long Island-based life sciences network. So happened to notice actually a posting on LinkedIn by my friend, colleague, and fellow Long Islander, Dan Gold. You may know him. He's the president of Fairway Consulting Group, which is a life sciences executive search firm. And he had joined the BioMentor initiative as a mentor. So he was posting that, he was announcing that he had joined, and I said, oh, this is, right up my alley. It's kind of something that I would love to be involved in. So he set me up with Diane, and joined very quickly, and am now one of, I believe there are over 25 mentors that are involved in this program.
That's great.
I'm sure, Amel, maybe you might know, I don't know how many mentees there are, but I know that it's continually growing. So that was just a case of within my network seeing someone else that I have formed a relationship with, getting involved in something similar. And I think that that's really, for me, at least within the New York ecosystem, how I have really been able to stay involved and to volunteer my time is, as I mentioned earlier, having inroads at the New York City Department of Education and being, able to connect them with young women in bio, and connect women in bio with Roche, and to be involved with NewYorkBIO. I think I've been coming to I haven't come to the conference, the annual conference, in the past couple of years, but had attended everyone up until, I think the pandemic. So, so I just think that we have a unique opportunity here in New York where it is a tight-knit group. And once you tap into that, I think that, the opportunities are really limitless.
And Jana, I posted the link to their webpage, to the Long Island BioMentor Initiative, right, webpage. And so that people can look it up and take it up. I do have a question though, because Amel, you're not at your company, is it on Long Island?
No, we're in Manhattan, based at Harlem Biospace.
Okay, that's what I thought. So you don't have to be physically located on Long Island to take advantage of the program.
No, you don't have to be, although there are great opportunities if you are looking to collaborate, especially at Stony Brook, and stuff like that. So that kind of, I think, adds depth to the program. Even it's an even bigger kind of incentive.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Long Island has long had really good science, and I think the more, it's only natural to have kind of the bridge into Manhattan. It's not like, it's not like it's terribly far away. It's reasonably easy to get here. The LIRR goes just about everywhere you want to go. So
including Grand Central now.
Including Grand Central. That's actually really useful. So yeah, that's tremendously helpful. So Amel, why don't you talk a little bit about kind of where you were when you started? How did you actually set up lab space? And really, what were some of the things that you were looking for? Were you looking for anything specific in a mentor, or just you knew you needed help and you wanted someone to give you help somewhere?
So I think, I mean, probably all of the above, but when I first started, it was kind of, as you do, I think, any entrepreneur, you're very focused on the project and the kind of immediate, the science tech side of stuff. So I knew about Harlem Biospace. I really liked it. I like the concept of it. I like when you go in there, if anyone's been, it feels a little like a workshop. It's a little, it's a cool space with lots of people doing lots of stuff, but it's not so formal like maybe Alexandria Launch Labs or somewhere like that. And it's not far from me, so I quite liked it. And so I set up lab space there. And I started to kind of get all of the equipment I needed and all of that. So that was in a way the easy part, funnily enough. The part that kind of gets harder and grows on you as you're actually building out your company is, okay, to translate any of this, like, what do I need? If you're a drug discovery biotech, you're going to need connections to pharma. You're going to know how do you get your product out there? What do you do? And so when I was speaking with Anton Xavier, that's when he mentioned the Long Island Biomentor Initiative. And when I went in there, I had an open mind, but I just thought my big thing was just connections to people that could help me, just translate my eventual product or whatever into market. I mean, that's what you want to do as a business. And anything else was just a bonus. And in fact, at that point, anything was a bonus. Even just a chat with someone, I'd grown tired of my own company. And so they start off with this kind of 360 review where you have this kind of 1 to 2 hour session with multiple volunteer mentors who basically question you, really, you present to them your startup and they will ask about anything and everything. And the idea is to really stress it and make you think of things you hadn't, and then identify where you think you need the most help. And with that, they kind of start to collect a team of mentors around your needs. So my team of mentors including Jana, is Adrian Chaban, who was at Pfizer and is now at Novartis, and I have John Haley and I have Stephen Parent, and they're both in the tech, previous tech startup world and academia. And so it was creating, and I guess Jenna comes in with the regulatory side. So it's very customized. And there have been other things like trying to find product market fit. So they have a research initiative for the students studying marketing at Stony Brook, and they did a project for us with the group, and that was to help us kind of identify where our products may fit, and competition and all of that. So again, really valuable stuff that's very tailored towards what you need and what your startup needs, and it develops as you get along, I think.
So Jana, I think you're in an interesting spot because you represent an area of expertise that startups rarely have when they start, right? And in general, I think the ability to know when to think about the regulatory question is incredibly important. And then once you do, how the heck do you go about it? And when do you bring on people, et cetera? So this is a ever so slight tangent, but why don't you give a very small TED talk on when startups should start to actually think about regulatory concerns?
Yeah.
The floor is yours on this one. This is really important. I think people probably need to hear it.
Yeah. So this is an easy one, and I always like to use FDA's words whenever possible. They will always say, "Come early and often to dialogue with them." Yeah. And so, you essentially need somebody like me in order to, to have that dialogue in an effective and strategic way. So that should give you your answer right there. By the time you're reaching out to me, you probably needed me a few months earlier. So I think
it's better, Jana, than having needed you a few years earlier.
That's true. That's fair. Absolutely. So what's nice about a consultancy, and what drove me to start the Oberman group, I opened up shop in August of last year, is that what we're seeing sort of trends in the workforce where, especially in biotech, where companies now, they want the flexibility to be able to bring someone on for, let's say, a discrete amount of time or for a particular program and have, sort of a very specific scope of work. And then to be able to, it's like a light switch. You can kind of scale them up, scale them down, rather than having your traditional full-time employment model. And so that's essentially, for me, that was the deciding factor in leaving the traditional full-time employee role. I had done big pharma, I had done biotech startup, and consultancy allows me to provide expert advice to my clients that are in various stages, but perhaps don't necessarily need someone full-time. So it's, as I said earlier, I provide advice throughout the life cycle of a drug's journey, hopefully through to commercialization. Right. But it's really often in the early stages where, at least for startups, they are not yet in the clinic, but they are working on their IND enabling studies and want to know how to go about getting questions answered from FDA and other health authorities so that they can efficiently move into the clinic. And then you have some, where we service global companies. You have some ex-US companies who have only focused on, let's say, drug development and clinical development in Europe, and now want to come to the US. And so, as I said, it can really kind of be, at any stage along this journey. But the short answer is early and often to engage with the health authorities.
And don't you think, I think one thing that as the New York sort of early stage ecosystem grows, I think there's also more opportunities for individuals and companies like yours, right? Because as companies grow, they need some very specialized services, but they're not ready from, their run rate can't handle everyone, right? Building out sort of the team all at once. So having these options for, fractional, if you want to call them fractional or consulting or whatever, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think though, and Amel, let me ask you this, from the standpoint of, starting a company, how do you think about sort of how you wanted to grow and staff sort of writ large? What was your approach and what have you seen others do in our ecosystem?
Sure. I think I'm generally just from experience and by the kind of nature I'm quite a streamlined person. And so I think I've always thought, especially at the earlier stages, having a smaller group of really kind of focused people on what you're trying to do. And then anything else, you finding really good either consultants or services that kind of build that up and can support it. And in those situations, you can access brilliant people, but without having to go out there, hire them, the burden of having to
pay for them. Yes.
Just all of that.
Yeah.
And then it all takes away. So, there's only so much you can manage and do properly. And actually there are people, I think I know quite a bit about the running a biotech startup and in terms of what needs to be done, the everyday sort of stuff. But, I wouldn't be at this stage comfortable or believe that I could hire someone to work as in-house counsel or for legal stuff or any of that, because that's just not my forte. It's better to access someone who actually has that expertise. And then there's, like you said, protecting runway and being kind of fiscally responsible with your resources. And so it's when needed, and you develop those relationships without having to worry about all of the other red tape around it. So that's kind of been my approach. I think a lot of early stage startup, either that they kind of employ this approach, or from what I've seen, or maybe they're not aware of the other people that they need yet, which we're all guilty of, when you're
everybody,
running a startup, you don't know what you need to know until,
you're like, uh-oh.
Like I said, like a few months later, like, okay,
Right.
And sometimes things like going to events or conferences or whatever help, someone may give a talk about something they do and you're like, oh, actually, we kind of need this.
So we could pivot a little bit. As an advisor to the company, you'd said you're putting a seed round together, Amel, right? So it would be interesting to get both your takes on what the financing environment is like now, and Amel, your perspective on it as a founder and a CEO, and Jana, your perspective on it as an advisor. Kind of what do you bring to that fundraising process, and how do you slot yourself in there? All right, so Amel, why don't you go first? You're going to set the table on the whole fundraising.
Yeah. So, I think we're literally just now starting to, the pitch deck is ready and all of the other stuff that you need for raising the round. And so I have some contacts that I'm going to approach. I think the hardest thing is knowing getting warm introductions for a start, knowing who might be a good fit or might be interested is another one. I think I haven't negotiated with anyone or pitched at the moment just yet. That's kind of coming up this week. So wish me luck. But but that, so from my perspective, I think the biggest thing at this stage is you kind of don't know. You read a lot, but you hear a lot, but you don't know what it's going to be like. And it's, having the contacts. I think the big thing that you need, or I need from a network is kind of, guidance on how to approach. Some people don't mind being cold called. There are funds at this stage, especially tech bio funds, that make it quite easy to access them. And then there are more traditional biotech funds where actually it's better to have a contact there, and someone that can kind of, I guess, pre-screen you. So I'll probably be able to answer that question a bit in a few weeks, a little bit better.
So your company started in 2019, and you're getting ready to raise the seed round. And last I checked, it's 2023. So did you have a friends and family round that was able to start?
So yeah, so there was that initially. And also the company, whilst it started in 2019, couldn't, any of the actual input really stopped during the pandemic. That had to save us some money because I was in the UK. And so really it's end of 2020. So I had that. We also were awarded $100,000 from Deerfield through their Exceed Award last year, and that was to develop our brain and Parkinson's disease application, and so that helped.
Okay, yeah, that because Derek and I were doing the math. I'm like, wait a minute, that's a lot. Like everyone is going to come find your secret then. Your runway was like
that is remarkable cash preservation.
A lot of very careful management of runway was involved, but I think that's not a bad habit to have early on.
No, it is not.
So Jana, how about your perspective on the funding environment, and with the caveat of how you as an advisor kind of can be either helpful there, or how you fit around the table with this discussion?
Yeah, I think, well, specifically as it relates to my relationship with Amel, I think I bring two things to the table. One is, as we've discussed, sort of being looped in very specifically to the New York network. And so that's actually how our relationship kicked off, and that's how we are here today. So, that's one aspect of it. But the other side of it is for my clients in general. As I said, they're in various stages of, either being a biotech startup or a mid-sized pharma. But for those earlier stage clients, from the regulatory perspective, what we can do is to help in terms of pitch decks, putting together, some of the regulatory strategy, ensuring that we're going through from a due diligence perspective and de-risking what is being shared with investors, looking at different opportunities within the regulatory landscape to leverage, let's say, something like an expedited development such as orphan drug designation or a fast track designation, which then becomes very appealing to investors. So trying to find those opportunities to showcase and helping to guide along the way.
What about, I'm going to throw this in here. What about engaging as part of the regulatory process with patient organizations and patient advocacy organizations? Where do you think that falls on the continuum of importance?
I'm glad you asked that, Jennifer, because I know that Luke Rosen has been on this breakfast series more than once, and he and I work together very closely at Ovid Therapeutics and are still in touch. I think that regulatory and patient engagement are closely intertwined, especially as it relates to, I feel very strongly about whenever possible, bringing patient advocates to health authorities, because it really allows the agencies to gain firsthand knowledge of the condition that we're studying. And more so, my specialty is really in rare diseases. So I think that in that particular space, it's really critical to have the two functions working, hand in hand to ensure that we are we want to show to the health authorities that what we're delivering is clinically meaningful to the patients, and we want to deliver to the patients something that is clinically meaningful. So, so yeah, I really think that it is a true partnership there.
And do you think that they have a role in, say, trial design as well?
Absolutely should, because I think that from the very beginning, you want to ensure that what the output from your trial is going to inform appropriately. And if you don't understand what the patients really need, you can't necessarily do that.
Yeah. All right. Let's see, we have a.
We just got a question in. She was so this is a question from Amel. This is a question from actually another Fulbright scholar at NYU, Carolina Sulich. So shout out to the Fulbright scholars. So her question is, how did the presidential executive order regarding the bioeconomy, how is that affecting your work? And is there any significant change during the last few months that you've seen?
I think no doubt it is affecting things positively. I think one of the things that even with the last administration, I think biotech, although I was in the UK because travel was kind of not permitted or entry into the US from the UK and the Schengen area and the EU, I did receive a special exemption purely because I was working on a biotech company to return. And then I think this administration's focus, they've really put biotech as the forefront of the industries that need to be developed, that the US must be upfront, kind of on top of, and with the politics around also kind of China gaining a competitive advantage. I think we will see the impact of that in the next few years, but already I think there is a greater effort. I think you can see that in sort of federal funding that's being made available to biotech. You can see that in the number of initiatives that are being funded by, so even in New York City, New York State, the number of incubators that have gone up, the dedicated buildings, the desire to kind of bring in all sorts of stages of biotech companies and pharma to set up here. It's being seen as an important potential driver of good jobs. And I think it also ties in with a lot of the jobs we're going to lose to automation, or we are losing to automation. Biotech provides that next industry that can really supercharge the economy. So I think I've seen positive so far, and I think we'll see a lot more as we go on. And just lastly, things like regulation. I think things like the FDA Modernization Act and the desire to use advanced culture, human relevant systems like organ on a chip and organoids. I think that's going to benefit from this drive forward.
And I think we've also seen, I think we're seeing also an interest in investing in biomanufacturing, right? Like that was a big component of what and while traditionally, except for things that don't take up a lot of space, right? Like you don't think about New York as much, but our entire region I view as sort of one and the same. And then I think about Jana, your former home at Roche and Nutley, right? I think that's being used for Modern Meadow. I think they're using a portion of that campus to manufacture. And so I think we're seeing the manufacturing pop up where it's available. I know down in Brooklyn, there's some big spaces, right? The Brooklyn Army Terminal. So I think we're developing all of the pieces we need for the full cycle, sort of robust biotech ecosystem. It's just, it takes time. But I think these things are going to be helpful.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I kind of view this as the second coming of the manufacturing in the region, because when I was growing up and becoming interested in science and thinking about my career on Long Island, we had Forest Laboratories. The headquarters was based, I want to say it was on 33rd Street, but it was somewhere in, on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
But the manufacturing was done on Long Island.
Yep.
Right.
And there was OSI, I believe, the ophthalmological company as well, based on Long Island. And I think some of those buildings are still there. I think the infrastructure may still be there, but they've long, moved elsewhere or gone out of business. But yeah, so, I won't date myself, but many moons ago, we did have that manufacturing, and then obviously it became very expensive. And I think the real estate, factor drove the companies away.
Yeah.
Well, OSI was bought by Astellas, and that's still kind of a bit of a sticking point, because there was There was a lot of excitement, and for a long time, they were actually going to keep the OSI, R&D, and manufacturing sites here. And then overnight, they didn't. And that really just kind of pulled a very large player out of the ecosystem. And, unfortunately, I think set Long Island back a long ways. There was a really good entrenched group of industrial scientists on Long Island. It was pretty vibrant, and it was ascending. It was going quite well, and that was a big loss to the ecosystem. That was a difficult one.
Yeah.
All right, so Amel, you're going to save biotech on Long Island here if we can do this right. So after you raise your seed round, what is the next thing that you're going to do? What does your company look like in 2 years if you put the round together that you'd like to see put together?
So I think our technology, it's to build it out. So cover more applications, but also the kind of combining the in silico and the in vitro testing and trying to line that up with clinical data. It's just making sure that we can feed back the data from the outputs, from our assets, from what we test back into our models so that we can make them even more accurate and better. And then we've got 3 applications, so skin, brain, and joints at the moment. And so for each of these, we have assets that are kind of being discovered and developed in the pipeline. So I'd like to see those kind of move forward. I think our skin matrix, our skin substitute is in prime position, and that's something that we can quite quickly move on, and that's the first one to do. So I think in terms of our output, it's just further reinforcing our platform, building out our applications, and making sure that the assets that look promising can move forward, because that's the final step to kind of really validating and strengthening our technology. It's showing what did that do in clinical trials. And the big thing from a business perspective is build out partnerships with pharma and license the assets that look promising. So that, I think, in the next 5 years, and what the team looks like is small but dedicated,
Small but mighty.
Small but mighty and dedicated, with a lot of support from mentors and consultants and other people. But I think that's kind of my vision for BioWorkshop in the next 5 years.
One thing that we've talked about mentorship, and then that makes me think, especially as we head into summer, right? It's finally warm here in New York, is sort of interns, right? And so how do you think, obviously as a small organization, how do you think about interns, both in how you might incorporate them, but also sort of your responsibility to the student community to encourage, an interest in STEM? So I'll ask both of you that, but Amel first.
I mean, I've benefited from mentorship, and I have mentored in the past. It's kind of just the bread and butter of a medical and surgical career in academia. And so it is something I'm passionate about. But the one thing for me is kind of tailoring it to each student or person that you mentor. What are their needs? What's their ambition? So I do have students that I've mentored, and they've been high school students, and then they've kind of gone to university, and they're reaching out now at the opportunities for summer programs. And I know that NYEDC, there are programs that can kind of bring mentors in, and I've been in contact with them for that. So for me, it's finding projects that will be beneficial to us, but also to them. Otherwise, it's just, and the way I mentor people is it's a lifelong thing. So they, you reach out, and at different stages they may be useful. And hey, one day I might join BioWorkshop. So there's a virtuous circle in that. So that's how I see it. And I think New York City especially, but probably the state as well, has a lot of opportunity for that.
Yeah. And
right.
Jana, how do you view the intern sort of opportunities and programs?
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to mentor folks at various levels, because Roche had a pretty robust PharmD fellowship in place. Mm-hmm. And while I personally don't have a PharmD, I was able to, these PharmD candidates would rotate in various disciplines, and when they would come into the regulatory affairs function, would be able to mentor them while they were there. And then we also did have an internship program as well. So that was sort of at the, graduate level.
Yeah.
But even down to about 3 weeks or a month ago, I was a judge out here on Long Island for high school. I think it was called the WAC Lighting Invitational Science Fair, where there were something like 14 high schools throughout Long Island that participated in this fair, and the really, I have to say, the output was phenomenal. So connected with one of the young ladies that had presented her abstract. And she said that she had been, sort of building out the STEM club at her high school. And I think that the next step would be then to interact with her and either potentially bring her on as an intern, a summer intern, as you mentioned, or think about reconnecting with an organization like Young Women in Bio and extending that out to Long Island, because it is the Metro New York region. So I think there are various ways in which you can effectuate it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And some schools have a robust program and others don't, right? So it in some respects, it depends on the teachers that happen to end up at the school. Our local high school has a robust science research program. And, part of that program is they have to do an internship. And I think it's like 40 or 60 hours. I mean, so it's maybe, you could do it in like 2 weeks or whatever. So it's not a whole summer, but it also, it's helpful, I think, for high schoolers to work at networking and trying to, they have to do a little work to find an intern program sometimes, which is a good life skill for these, for the kids to start working on. So,
Yep.
Derek?
I was going to throw Jana a little bit of a curveball. So you were talking about rare diseases before, and we've talked about New York as really kind of a hotbed of patient advocacy and the big potential for rare disease. So can you talk a little bit about kind of where we can go as a region? And I would tailor it towards the mentoring aspect. How can younger people get involved in that area of science and development, considering how new it is? And does that, do you think, give us as a region a bit of a leg up on how we can grow over the next decade?
That is a curveball.
Yeah, sorry. No, I came up with it about 10 minutes ago. I was excited to ask you.
Yeah. No, I think that from my perspective, I personally would start with more maybe on the institutional side of things, because I know, for example, Columbia University has an incredible program, research center that is focused on rare diseases. And so that would be a good opportunity for, obviously in academia, they can always use a set of extra hands. So I think that really would be a great place to start. And industry is always looped into the academic institutions in the region, right? So then you kind of expand your network out from there. And we just in working at Roche and in Ovid, we definitely had those relationships and would leverage, even if we were just using the investigator as a site for a clinical trial, we would foster that relationship. And then, as I mentioned earlier, potentially leverage their expertise when going to a health authority. So I think it's really figuring out where the nerve net of sorts might be for that particular either rare disease itself or a center of excellence for rare diseases. And that's where I would start.
And what about, so let's talk a little bit about, because I know we only have a few more minutes. We've talked a little, sort of here and there about the ecosystem as we've, worked our way through. But Amel, can we go to a basic question? So once you finished, right, your Fulbright Scholar program at NYU, like why didn't you go back to the UK? Like what, obviously you went back and got stuck, but beyond that little blip, what made you decide to start a company, right? And put down roots here in New York?
Yeah, so I think the idea of starting a company had probably been percolating for a while, but you kind of just dismiss it to the side, especially if you are in quite an established career like medicine or academia, where that's not, there's a very defined path there. But it had been kind of just simmering, and there was a point where I was like, to do what I want to do, this is the best vehicle for it. And so the question was where to do it. And honestly, I think the ecosystem in the US for biotech particularly, and the startup, it is just more advanced. I think the UK is doing better, but there are several strands to the ecosystem. So obviously one is availability of things like lab space, affordable lab space incubators. So Harlem Biospace is funded by the city and the state, and that helps a lot. The other is just there are a lot more people doing biotech startups here. So it becomes more tangible. You speak to different entrepreneurs, you discover their journey, and it's not such a crazy, everyone, especially in biotech, founders are people who have had careers that have then moved into this, and they have different paths into it. And so that makes it. And then, funding is very important for any tech company. And I think particularly biotech, which is resource intensive, and that exists just in a more established and formal way here. And there are different avenues for that. And then finally, just kind of all the main programs, whether it's accelerators, whether it's conferences, whatever, they happen here. So it is just easier to be
New York Bio.
Exactly. And so that was the thing, and it all kind of made sense. And sometimes I think if everything kind of leads to one thing, you have to do it. What's the worst that could happen? I could have just returned to the UK and did that, or whatever. So you have to make a decision based on what works at that moment.
Jana, what are your thoughts on sort of the development of the New York City ecosystem? Because you were here, you were a big company, startup company, Boston startup, right? So like you have a unique perspective, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who is really obviously a champion for, for the continued growth of the ecosystem, I think Amel and I were talking about it yesterday. I think it's somewhat unique because there are obviously various other what's the word I'm looking for, but other verticals in New York. And so it's not like a Cambridge where, it really is focused, Cambridge, Massachusetts, it really is focused on biotech. And so I think it can be somewhat hard to penetrate at times. And that's one of the things I hope to help Amel with. But as I said earlier, I think that once you do, it really is a tight-knit group. And we do all genuinely have the same goal of ensuring that New York becomes one of the top, areas in this sector.
Yeah.
You guys are well on your way, right? And I think back to about a decade ago where a lot of this stuff didn't exist. I think when folks started a company a decade ago, they were on much more of an island. There was much less lab space. There were much fewer people around. It wasn't the same. And I think there has just been this confluence of folks who have either come back to the ecosystem or have made this, real dedication to, building it. Everybody is their own little building block. So I think with everything that you guys are doing, and certainly Jana, everything that you've done here, they're all little steps to New York being what I think is the best version of itself as an ecosystem. So with that, we're going to let everybody go and go off into the sunshine and enjoy a beautiful day. So thank you both so much for being here. Amel, best of luck for raising your tea drones, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.